Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to Beyond Curious and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube keeps showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. My name's Renee Ostrander. I'm 34, and for 6 years I've worked nights for the Parks Department in a mid-sized city I'd rather not name specifically. My job is about as unglamorous as it sounds. I drive a loop through 11 different parks and green spaces after closing, lock the vehicle gates, check the restroom buildings, make sure nobody's camping out where they're not supposed to. I found drunk teenagers, loose dogs, one very confused raccoon that had gotten into a trash can and couldn't get back out. I'm telling you all that so you understand that strange, for me, used to have a pretty low ceiling. Most nights, strange was a possum in a picnic shelter. That changed a little over 2 months ago, starting with the biggest park on my route, a long green corridor that follows a creek bed through the middle of the city for almost 3 miles. It's popular during the day, dog walkers, joggers, families. At night it empties out fast, which is exactly why it's on my loop. The first thing I noticed wasn't anything I saw, it was the dogs. Twice in 1 week, dog walkers leaving right at dusk told me their dogs had refused to go past a certain footbridge, planting all 4 feet and backing up like something on the other side had already decided something about them. I told myself dogs do that. Every dog owner's had a dog balk at something for no good reason. That held up for about a week. Then the reports started coming in from people, not just their dogs. A jogger told the department's daytime office that she'd seen something upright cross the trail near that same footbridge, gone into the tree line before she could get a real look. Nobody took it seriously. My supervisor, a guy named Frank, who's run this route for almost 20 years and has heard every excuse in the book for people not wanting to walk certain sections after dark, made a joke about it in our shift meeting and moved on. I laughed along with everyone else. I want to be honest that I didn't actually believe anything yet. I just started, without really deciding to, driving a little faster through that stretch. The thing about my job is I'm alone almost the entire shift, which means I don't have anybody to talk myself out of things with in real time. So when I started noticing my own reactions changing, there wasn't anybody there to tell me I was being ridiculous. About 3 weeks in, I started parking farther from that footbridge gate than I needed to and walking the rest, because something about driving right up to it at night had started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't explain to Frank without sounding unhinged. The first thing I actually saw myself happened on a Tuesday, a little after 10 at night. I was locking the gate at the north end, maybe 40 yards from that footbridge, when my flashlight caught something crossing the open grass on the far side of the creek. It moved upright, on 2 legs, low and fast, more like a person running hunched over than any 4-legged animal I've ever seen out there. It crossed maybe 15 feet of open ground in the beam before it hit the tree line and was gone. I stood there for a long few seconds convincing myself it had been a person, a homeless guy, a kid messing around, somebody who didn't want to get caught and ran for the trees. That explanation held up right up until I thought harder about how it had moved, and how fast, and how low to the ground it had stayed the entire time. I didn't tell Frank that night. I told him about a week later, after it happened again, closer this time, at a different park almost a mile away. He didn't laugh the second time. He got quiet, and he told me something I hadn't heard before, that a groundskeeper who'd worked that same creek corridor almost 15 years earlier had put in for a transfer out of nowhere and never once explained why, just said he didn't want to work nights on that stretch anymore. Frank said at the time he'd figured it was a personal thing. He said he wasn't so sure anymore. That second sighting stuck with me longer than the first, mostly because of how close it happened to my truck. I'd been walking a restroom building perimeter with my flashlight when I heard something moving through a stand of ornamental grass, maybe 20 feet off, low and fast, the same hunched 2-legged gait, gone into a drainage culvert before I could get the beam fully on it. I stood there afterward doing the math out loud to myself, the way you do when you're trying to talk yourself down. A person crawling wouldn't move that fast. A dog wouldn't move upright at all. I didn't have an answer that fit, so I just finished the building check faster than usual and got back in the truck. Word started spreading online after that, the way it does. A post on a neighbourhood app describing something similar near a different park across town. Tall, upright, glimpsed only for a second or two. Always near water, always gone before a phone camera could come up fast enough. The comments split the way they always do. Half the replies calling it somebody's dog off leash. the other half swearing they'd seen the same thing themselves in a completely different part of the city. I read every comment on my dinner break one night and came away more unsettled than reassured, because two of them described the exact same low, hunched gait I'd seen with my own eyes, from people who had no way of knowing what I'd already witnessed. One of those comments came from a woman who said she walked her dog along a different stretch of the same creek most mornings before sunrise, and that about a month earlier her dog had found something in the grass she still couldn't explain. A patch of ground flattened down in a rough circle, grass pressed flat in a way that hadn't grown back weeks later. She'd posted a photo. I saved it to my phone and compared it, on a hunch, to a similar flattened patch I found myself near the footbridge about a week after that, close enough in size and shape that I stood there in the dark longer than I should have, just looking at it. I called animal control eventually, mostly to have it on some kind of record. A tired sounding officer took my description over the phone, asked a few routine questions, and told me they'd had a handful of similar calls that month from different parts of the city. No confirmed pattern, nothing conclusive enough to act on. He said it almost apologetically, like he wished he had something better to tell me. Before we hung up he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that none of the calls had come with any evidence of an actual attack. No injured pets, no confirmed contact, nothing beyond people describing the same shape from a distance. I asked him if that made him think it wasn't dangerous. He was quiet for a second longer than felt comfortable before he said he honestly didn't know. I still work that route. I still lock that gate every night, though I don't linger there the way I used to before any of this started. Frank switched a co-worker of mine, a guy named Dale, who has a habit of cracking his knuckles one at a time whenever he's uneasy about something, onto that section with me for a few weeks, just so nobody's doing it completely alone. Dale's knuckles have gotten a real workout lately. We don't talk about it much on shift. We just make sure we're both back at the truck before we call it a wrap on that stretch. Dale saw something himself about 10 days into working that section with me, though he waited almost a full shift before he brought it up. He said he'd caught a shape crossing between two trees near the creek, close enough that he'd actually stopped walking and stood still, waiting to see if it would come back into view. It didn't. He described the same low, hunched posture I'd seen twice by then, and when I asked him how tall he thought it stood, he just shook his head and said taller than he wanted it to be. He hasn't brought it up again since, and I haven't pushed him to. The department put up 2 additional motion-triggered cameras near the creek corridor not long after that, mostly to satisfy a handful of resident complaints rather than out of any real expectation of catching something conclusive. So far they've picked up deer, a couple of raccoons, and one blurry, badly lit frame that Frank showed me on his phone without much comment, just a pale shape at the very edge of the beam, gone in the very next frame. He didn't say what he thought it was. Neither did I. I saw it one more time, about 2 weeks ago, from farther away this time, just a shape at the edge of my headlights near the same creek, gone before I could even reach for my radio. I didn't chase it. I didn't get out of the truck. I sat there a minute with the engine running, then finished my loop like normal, because that's the job, and because I genuinely don't know what I'd do if I ever got close enough to see it clearly. Frank's talked quietly about maybe rerouting that whole section of the shift, having somebody lock the north gates earlier in the evening, before full dark, so nobody has to be out there alone once the light's completely gone. Nothing's official yet. I think part of him is hoping this settles down on its own before he has to explain a schedule change to anybody above him who'd want a reason for it. I don't think it's settling down. I think we've all just gotten better at not saying so out loud. Some nights I think about that jogger's dog backing away from that footbridge like it already knew something the rest of us were still working out for ourselves. I lock that gate a little faster than I used to. I don't look at the tree line longer than I have to. And I still don't have a single good explanation for what's been using my park system after we've all gone home. My name's Walt Brennan. I'm 63 now. And from 1994 to 2003, I worked contract security at a fenced federal storage annex out in the high desert, the kind of facility where the job description was mostly standing post and staying awake through a shift that never had anything happen on it. I'm not going to name the facility or the agency I contracted through. Given everything that's happened this year, you'll understand why I'm still careful about that, even now. What I can tell you is that for most of my 9 years there, the job was exactly as uneventful as it sounds. Long fence lines, motion sensors, a radio check every hour, and a lot of very cold or very hot hours depending on the season. I bring all that up because on the night this actually started, nothing about the shift felt different going in. It was a Thursday close to midnight, my usual rotation with a younger guard named Ochoa, a quiet guy who always kept a toothpick going in the corner of his mouth, whether he was eating anything or not. We were doing a routine perimeter drive when the radio chatter changed. Somebody at the command post reported an unidentified aerial contact on the facility's own airspace, monitoring close, low, and moving in a way our supervisor later described, off the record, as inconsistent with any aircraft he'd ever tracked in 20 years of doing that job. I want to be clear that my first reaction wasn't fear. It was mostly annoyance, because an alert like that meant a long night of extra procedure on top of an already long shift. I told myself it was probably a weather balloon, or a drone somebody at a nearby ranch had no business flying that close to a federal facility. That held up for about the length of time it took us to actually see it. A light low over the perimeter fence on the northeast corner, holding almost perfectly still for a span of time, our own report later logged as roughly 6 minutes, before it moved off faster than anything I'd ever personally watched an aircraft move. Ochoa didn't say much that night. He just kept working that toothpick harder and harder in the corner of his mouth, which I'd come to learn over the following years was about the only outward sign he ever gave that something had actually gotten to him. We finished the drive in near silence, both of us checking that same stretch of fence in the mirrors more than either of us would have admitted to at the time. Command post asked us to hold position and observe rather than approach, which suited neither of us fine, since approaching had never once crossed my mind as something I wanted to do. We filed a report through the proper channels, the way we were trained to, describing the light, the duration, and the way it had moved off once it finally did move. Within about a day and a half, two of us and everyone else on shift that night were called in separately and asked to sign additional paperwork on top of the standard federal non-disclosure agreement we'd already signed as a condition of employment. This one was more specific. It named the incident by report number and instructed us never to discuss it, in any context, with anyone outside a very short list of cleared personnel for the remainder of our lives. The man who had us sign it was somebody none of us recognized, flown in rather than one of the facility's usual administrative staff, and he answered almost none of our questions directly. When I asked, plainly, whether what we'd seen had anything to do with a foreign aircraft or a domestic testing program, he told me only that the paperwork wasn't optional, and that my continued employment depended on my signature that same afternoon. I signed. So did Ochoa, and so did the 4 other people who'd been anywhere near that perimeter the night before. I told myself at the time that it was standard procedure for anything unusual at a facility like ours, that the paperwork was probably more about protecting sensitive detection capabilities than about the object itself. I believed that more or less for a long time. What I couldn't explain away as easily was what happened over the following 2 years, which was nothing officially and something unofficially on a slow, quiet repeat. 3 more incidents, similar profile, similar duration, always logged, always followed by the same kind of quiet, targeted follow-up conversation with whoever had been on shift. The second of those 3 happened on a shift I wasn't working, but Ochoa was, and he came in the next evening looking like he hadn't slept, toothpick worked down almost to nothing in the corner of his mouth. He wouldn't describe it to me in detail, only that it had come lower over the fence line than the first one had, close enough that the perimeter lighting had briefly washed out along one whole section, and that command post had taken almost 11 minutes to respond to the alert instead of the usual 2 or 3. He said the delay bothered him more than the light itself had. Ochoa left the job abruptly after the 3rd incident. No notice beyond the required 2 weeks. No explanation beyond telling me, the night before his last shift, that he didn't think the paperwork was really about the airspace at all anymore. I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head and told me some things were better left exactly where they were, and that I should think hard before I ever asked that question of anybody else at that facility. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it like a man who'd already decided the subject was closed, for his own sake as much as mine. I didn't hear from him again for almost 20 years. I stayed almost 7 more years. Nothing else happened, at least nothing I personally witnessed, though I heard secondhand, careful hedge secondhand, about at least 2 more incidents on shifts I wasn't working. One of them, a maintenance worker told me years later over a beer he probably shouldn't have been having with me, had lasted long enough that a second facility roughly 40 miles away logged something similar on its own equipment that same night, though as far as I know the 2 reports were never officially connected to each other. I left the job in 2003 for an ordinary reason: better pay somewhere else. and I mostly put the whole thing in a drawer in my head and didn't open it again for a very long time. This past month, that changed. I don't need to walk you through the news coverage, you've probably seen at least some of it. But the short version is that a new federal order came down directing agencies to formally waive old non-disclosure agreements for people like me, former personnel from programs connected to unidentified aerial phenomena, so we could finally speak on the record if we chose to. I got a call from an investigator connected to that effort about 3 weeks ago, and after a lot of careful back and forth, I agreed to a recorded interview. Before I signed anything, I spent most of a week going back and forth on it in my head. My wife asked me, more than once, what I thought I actually stood to gain from finally saying it out loud after so long. I didn't have a great answer for her beyond the fact that carrying something for 30 years starts to feel like its own kind of weight, whether or not you can point to what it's cost you. I also, for whatever it's worth, tracked down Ochoa's name through an old mutual contact and left him a message before I made a final decision. He never called back. I don't know if that means he'd already decided against talking himself, or if he just didn't want to be the one to talk me into it. I signed the waiver on a Tuesday, in a lawyer's office 3 towns over from where I live now. For the first time in over 30 years, I said the report number out loud to another human being. Here's the part I genuinely didn't expect. 2 nights after that interview, close to 1 in the morning, I woke up to my own back porch motion light going off, the same kind of light I hadn't thought twice about in the 11 years I've lived in this house. I looked out and saw nothing, the way you usually see nothing when a motion light trips on its own, except it happened again the following night, almost the same time, and the night after that, a low steady hum I couldn't place, gone by the time I got fully outside to listen for it. I've had a security company out twice. They found nothing wrong with the light, nothing wrong with the wiring, no explanation for either the light or the sound. The 4th night it happened, I actually made it outside fast enough to see something, or at least to think I did. A low shape moving along the tree line at the back edge of my property, gone before I'd taken more than a few steps off the porch. My wife heard me come back in and asked what I'd seen. I told her I wasn't sure, which was true, and which felt like an uncomfortable echo of every report I'd ever filed 30 years earlier, using almost exactly those same words. I called the investigator back and told her carefully what had been happening. She went quiet for a moment before she told me, off the record, that I wasn't the first person from that CMR of the program to report something similar in the weeks right after coming forward. She wouldn't say how many others. She said the pattern wasn't consistent enough to draw any real conclusion from yet, only that it had come up often enough that she'd started keeping an informal note of it separate from the official file. She said she couldn't confirm any connection, and that she genuinely wasn't in a position to tell me whether that was reassuring or not. I don't regret signing that waiver. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. After 30 years of not being able to say a single word about what I saw on that fence line, being able to finally say it out loud, to my kids, to that investigator, to you right now, has been worth something I can't fully put into words. But I sleep with that porch light where I can see it from my bed now. And some nights, when it flickers on for no reason I can find, I lie there and wonder if silence was doing more for me all those years than I ever gave it credit for. I signed the paper that says I'm allowed to talk now. Nobody signed anything promising me what happens next. My name's Dolores Vance. I'm 51 and I run about 40 head of goats and a smaller herd of sheep on family land in South Texas that's been in my husband's family since his grandfather's time. Ranching's a hard, unglamorous living most years, and losing an animal here and there to coyotes or the occasional mountain lion passing through is just part of the math you accept when you do this work. I'm telling you that so you understand what kind of loss it takes to actually rattle somebody who's done this as long as I have. This wasn't that kind of loss. It started in late May with a single goat found dead near the back fence line, close to a stretch of brush that runs along a dry creek bed. What struck me wasn't that she was dead. Animals die out here. It was how little was actually wrong with her from a distance. No obvious mauling, no drag marks, nothing that read like a typical predator kill. Up close there were 2 small puncture wounds at the throat, and remarkably little blood at the scene for what should have been a violent death. I called it a fluke. Told myself maybe a smaller animal had gotten to her after something else had already killed her some other way. That explanation held up for about 10 days. Then it happened again. A second goat, same stretch of fence line, same kind of clean, small wound, same strange absence of the mess I'd expect from a coyote or dog kill. My husband, a practical man who's dealt with every kind of predator this land has to offer over 30 years, walked the fence line himself and told me he genuinely couldn't identify what had done it. He mentioned almost reluctantly that his own father used to talk about losing animals the same way out on that same stretch of land, decades back, and always blamed it on something he never fully named, just called whatever gets in along the creek. I'd always taken that for an old rancher's superstition. I stopped being so sure. That second loss happened almost exactly 11 days after the first, close enough to a pattern that I started marking dates on the kitchen calendar without really deciding to. My husband didn't say much about the calendar, but I noticed he started walking that fence line himself most mornings, coffee in hand, well before he used to bother checking on the herd at all. He's not a man who volunteers worry out loud. The extra walking told me more than anything he actually said. I put up a trail camera after the second loss, mostly out of frustration more than any real expectation it would catch anything useful. For almost 2 weeks it caught nothing but raccoons, one very persistent possum, and my own dog investigating the fence line at 3 in the morning for reasons of his own. Then, on a night in early June, it caught something else. A single frame, badly blurred by motion, low to the ground, moving along the fence line with a strange, hunching gait. Not a coyote's silhouette, not a dog's. I zoomed in as far as the image would let me, and still couldn't tell you with any confidence what I was looking at. Beyond that, it was smaller than a person, and moved nothing like any four-legged animal I could match it to. I showed that frame to my husband before I showed it to anyone else. He looked at it a long time without saying much, turned his phone sideways once, then back, and finally said only that it didn't look sick to him, which wasn't the word I'd used, but was clearly the word he'd been thinking since Herrera's first visit. I asked him what he meant by that. He said a sick animal moves like it's struggling. Whatever was in that frame didn't look like it was struggling with anything at all. I sent the same frame to my sister, mostly to see what a fresh set of eyes made of it, and she called me back within the hour sounding more rattled than I expected. She'd shown it, without telling me first, to her father-in-law, a lifelong rancher 2 counties over, who apparently went quiet for a good while before telling her he'd seen animals lost the same clean way on his own land once, years back, and had never once found an explanation he was satisfied with. He hadn't wanted to say much more than that over the phone either. I called our county extension agent, a soft-spoken man named Herrera, who's dealt with plenty of livestock losses over the years and has a habit of tapping his pen against his clipboard whenever he's working through something he doesn't have a tidy answer for. He looked at the photo for a long time, tapping that pen the whole while, before telling me it was most likely a mangy coyote. That disease can change an animal's gait and appearance enough to throw off identification from a blurry image. It was a reasonable answer. I wanted to believe it. Herrera asked, before he left, whether I'd noticed anything else unusual, any smell, any sound, anything at all beyond the losses themselves. I told him about a low, dry, rattling noise I'd started hearing some nights from the direction of the creek. Not quite an insect sound, and not quite anything else I could match it to. He wrote that down without much comment, tapped his pen twice more, and told me to call if it happened again with anything else attached to it. I mostly did believe his coyote explanation, right up until we lost a third animal 2 weeks later. Again at night, again along that same stretch, again with wounds that didn't match anything a sick coyote should be capable of doing that cleanly. I called my nearest neighbour after that third loss, an older woman named Connie, who's ranched adjoining land for almost 40 years and has never struck me as someone inclined toward exaggeration. I asked her, carefully, if she'd ever lost animals the same way. There was a long pause on the phone before she told me, quietly, that she had, twice, years apart, always along that same creek corridor that runs between our 2 properties. She said she'd never reported it to anyone beyond her own husband, because the one time she mentioned it at the local feed store, she got enough sideways looks that she decided it wasn't worth repeating. She told me she still keeps a light burning near her own barn most nights, and that she'd started doing it long before she ever expected to need to explain why. Connie and I compared notes as best we could. Both of us had lost animals only along that same creek-adjacent stretch, never anywhere else on either property. Both of us had noticed our dogs refusing to approach that section of fence after dark, even dogs that had never shown that kind of hesitation about anything before. Neither of us had a name for what we were dealing with beyond the vague, half-embarrassed word our own late father-in-law apparently used decades earlier, which neither of us wanted to say out loud on the phone, so we just didn't. She also told me something that stayed with me more than almost anything else from that call. She said the two losses she'd had, years apart, had each come in a short cluster of 2 or 3 animals and then simply stopped, with nothing in between but ordinary quiet for years at a stretch. She said she'd always privately wondered whether it was the same thing coming back on some cycle only it understood, or something different passing through each time and never quite finishing whatever it had started. She said she'd stopped trying to decide which answer scared her less. I made some changes after that third loss. I moved the herd's night pen a good distance from that stretch of fence, put in stronger motion lighting along the whole creek corridor, and started bringing the dogs in closer to the house after dark instead of letting them range the property the way they used to. Since making those changes, back in the middle of June, I haven't lost another animal to anything I can't explain. I want to be honest that I don't know whether that means the changes worked, or whether whatever it was simply moved somewhere else, onto land where nobody's watching as closely as Connie and I started watching ours. The trail camera's still up. It hasn't caught anything since that one blurred frame. My husband still walks that fence line most mornings out of habit, and he still won't quite commit to an explanation when I ask him directly what he thinks got those 3 animals. He did, a few weeks back, quietly move a second, older trail camera he'd had stored in the barn out to a different stretch of the creek without telling me until after he'd already done it, which I took as its own kind of answer. Connie and I talk most weeks now, the way we never really used to before this. She still keeps that light on near her barn. I've started doing the same near mine, and if you asked me to give you a solid reason why, beyond it can't hurt, I honestly couldn't give you one. Herrera still calls every so often to ask if anything new has turned up. So far I've told him no every time, and so far that's been true. I just know 3 animals died the same exact way along the same exact stretch of fence, that Connie lost hers the same way on her own cycle years before mine ever started, and that whatever did it never once left enough behind to tell either of us for certain what we were actually up against.